Welcome to the Manager Matt podcast show. The show is designed to give you solutions to your day-to-day management and leadership problems. It's hosted by Matthew Haddock, a frontline manager and leader with over 25 years of experience. If you're ready, then let's get on with the show.
Welcome to the Manager Matt podcast show, a weekly show designed to help you as a manager and leader become the best at delivering results you need. Please, if you haven't already, subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode and share it with others who might see the benefit. Right, without any more delay, let's get on with this week's show. Welcome to the Manager Matt podcast show. Nearly forgot what the show was called there. That's not a great start to a podcast, is it, if you forget your own show name? Well, as I've been going through the concept of leadership over the last few weeks, I thought I'd do part 3 and finish off the mind map that I created. So in front of me, right here, the rustle, is a printed off version of the mind map. And over the last couple of episodes that we've done this, we've covered a big 5 again. So we went through the idea of having a management competencies. Then I looked at positive leadership and the idea of a safety culture within your business. So today, I want to explore the last few. So I'm going to go around it and I'm going to go through the other bits in a bit of detail to cover what I think the concepts of leadership and management are really about. So let's go around the circle. Now, I've got on my list, and in no particular order, performance management. So you've got to think delivering results is the major part of what we do as leaders and managers. We're there to deliver results. And when I mean that, I don't mean it always in the sense of the financial. Because, yes, of course, if you're in a business that is a financially driven business, then you are going to have to hit certain financial targets. But there's lots of other businesses and lots of other people who it will be around different kind of results. And, of course, different departments have different metrics. Although the overall aim of most companies in regards to what they do is to either deliver a product or a service, but also to make money. Within that, there's a number of departments that might not generally contribute directly to that. I mean, in some way they do, but not directly. So if you think of HR, for example, if you think of marketing, all those have points to play, but they don't directly touch the product as per se. So when I look at the performance management of this, I'm thinking delivering results, I'm thinking KPIs or key performance indicators. And these are business metrics that are really important to make sure that you're hitting the target when you need to. Usually it's around the old analogy of cost, service, quality, safety, environment. And those are the ones that you'll be measured on quite a lot in your business. And obviously these are the things that you're going to really need to get right day in, day out to make sure that you're delivering and beating the competition. And don't forget it is a competition. You need to go out there and beat the competition. And of course, from performance management, not just the hard metrics, the tangibles, there's also the people performance side of it. So those are things that are making sure that you've got the right blend of rewards for what they're doing, the right benefits for being there, the right flexibilities, the right policies. It's all very well having a really good base wage, but if the place isn't right for them to grow, it doesn't have any development plans, then you start losing people because there's nowhere for them to advance. And that's all around goal setting, making sure you're setting their expectations, making sure you're recruiting the right team. So when I talk about KPIs, you're talking about twofold: a business metric KPI pack, which is all the good stuff that you'll know, safety rates, the number of service hits you've got, the on time in full, the business numbers, so your cost per X, all those kind of things, your service, your quality, your number of complaints. And then you've got your softer people goals, your retention factors, your absence are two of those that you're more measurable. But then you've got to make sure you've got to set goals, have the best to attract the right development. That could be a good apprentice program. It could be an idea of developing to teams as you go through. It could be bringing in graduates. Those kind of things all make a massive difference to that whole element of delivering results and through a performance management. So that's the first thing on my list in part 3. So to build on that last point around performance and the people side of it, there's also things such as recruitment tools. I mentioned it slightly, right people to fit the organisation. Those are things that are very important to a concept of leadership. Building a team, another really important. Having really good individuals, but we know if they don't work as well as a team, they're not delivering, they're not really living the values or the ethos of what you want, then you really don't want them in your team, because these are the kind of people who will drag them down. And of course, to do that, you've got to make sure that you've got a career development plan. You are scanning the horizon to make sure you're bringing in the right talent. You're making sure that you're pushing people in the right way, in a good way, pushing not in a negative way, for them to develop their talent, to give them opportunities to grow, and also be very aware that not everyone wants to grow. If you consider your traditional bell curve, you can have people who are really high achievers wanting to go someplace at the top end, and at the bottom, the ones who are going to need a bit more help, a bit more support, the ones who are not really going to fit in and maybe would leave the business. But the majority are going to sit in the middle. Those are people who might want to develop and should be given opportunities, but be aware that they might not want to. And of course, you need to let the people know that you're there as their manager to drive that. So a career conversation is something that's very important to lots of managers and leaders, to make sure that the people know that they're on the right path. So that touches on the idea of people as a continuation of the people metrics. Moving on to things that you do need to know about concept of leadership, things like conflict management. So how do you deal with conflict well? If we talk about the big five, your one-to-ones, feedback, coaching, empowerment and delegation, those obviously help make everyone aware of where we're going. It maybe sets direction for people very easily. But conflict will happen, and there's small conflicts and there's larger conflicts, but you've got to be wary of those as a concept of leadership to make sure that you have got the tools right to be able to deal with that. And that's mediation, that's talking, that's setting goals, that's having a vision together as a team. Again, all these pieces fit together to make it easier for you as a leader to lead your team and deal with conflict. But don't be afraid of conflict. There is positive conflicts in lots of the teams I've led, which have led to great things. Ideas build on ideas, and sometimes conflict can trigger, if done rightly, if controlled, and if under the right circumstances, can have a positive conflict, can drive a business forward and drive departments forward and make them better. Because we're not all sort of on the same page sometimes, and having some conflicts just maybe realigns the fact that maybe you as a leader haven't delivered the right vision, you haven't given the right goals, you haven't used your one-to-ones and feedback in the right way, you haven't given them the chance to be delegated and empower them, and you're not coaching them. So that gives you some instant feedback when you see the conflict side of it to be able to do something different. If we move on, let's look at things like concept of leadership around strategic development. So you know that you're going to have to be able to deliver a certain amount of goals, but also the higher up your organisation you get, the more you're going to be thinking around strategical development. So have you looked at the mission? Do you know the purpose and the vision of your department, of the business? Have you communicated that? Do you know what lens people see their purpose in there? And are you, as a manager, giving them those directions? As a leader, are you setting out the next 3 to 5 years of a vision? And it obviously can become wallpaper. Some corporate mission statements will sit there, and really, do people know them? Some may be able to chant them like a mantra, but a lot of times people don't. So you've got to think of strategy as a one concept and where we're going, all the vision, purpose, but also how do you get that strategy into action? How do you engage people and get them to go beyond the norm by using the strategy? How do you get them to be efficient and look at that strategy and how they can deliver it? And putting it into action, it's also around how you can affect the day-to-day. What capital and cash are you going to need in the future? What customer relationships are you going to have in the future? What products will you sell, or what services will you deliver? Because the services you're doing now, and maybe you've done for the last 20 years, might not be the future that you need. So you need to scan your horizon. You need to look at your threats. Your SWOT is a very good tool. So your strengths, opportunities, weaknesses and threats that are out there. And also looking for what big things can come along. Certain things you very rarely have these, but they can come along, such as a pandemic, and really knock you out. You maybe never plan for those. A war that's currently going on, and I record this in Ukraine, something that's affected global markets massively. But as in any global markets, they bounce back. because other people start to grow crops, other people deliver services. Trade with certain countries stops, so trade has to be increased with other countries. That's part of markets. There will be a dip, but most of the time it comes back. Whereas your job as a leader is to try to have as much of an idea of what that future might look. You don't have a crystal ball, totally understand that, but have you got everything else lined up to be able to make those decisions? And on the micro and macro levels, smaller decisions that are coming along, are they affecting you? Simple things like the move away from fossil fuels. How does that affect your business? If you're a business that's heavily into fossil fuels, I would say you're massively going to be affected. But that's where you're scanning your horizon, using your pestle, which is where you're looking at your political, economical, social, technological, environmental and legal, and you're looking and saying what could change in those areas that could affect my business. And sometimes when you're so much into the day-to-day, it can be very difficult to do the scanning. But don't leave it up to your strategic people, because obviously you've got to make sure that you're future-proofing your business and your future. So you've got to go out there and say, what does that customer need now and in the future? What is our strategical purpose now in the future? Are we living it? Do we communicate? Where are we going? It's a really good question. It's not something we ask a lot. You're so much in the grind. Do you step back and go, well, where are we going? What are we going to look like? Do we know the purpose that's going to be the next thing in the next few years? You should be able to it, and then you should communicate it through your teams. Because when you're making decisions, you can then look and say, are we living the values? Are we actually doing what we need to do to deliver the results we're going to need in the next, in the next months and years you're going to have to deliver them, but do you want a business in the next 3 to 5 years? I would probably say yes. So, what's up and coming, what's in, what's out, and how can we strategically see that and look at that? And then obviously from that, you drive your tactics into it. And that's where you have your shift. So you've got your strategical development, which then shifts towards your tactics. And the tactics are obviously around the day-to-day of a management life. Because although I use this a lot intertwining managers and leaders, that is the difference. You have to be a person who can manage the long term and looking ahead. You've got to be able to react in the middle, but you've also got to know the day-to-day. If you're a leader at a certain level, you may have lots of directs who are responsible for lots of things, but you're accountable for the whole. So you need to know, what are the KPIs of the good day? What does a good day look like? Are we delivering those results? If you've got an issue, how are we going to deal with it? How do we create a plan to fix it? How do we escalate? Because every boss has a boss. So at what point do you have to escalate? And how do you manage the monkeys? And I've done a podcast on how you manage monkeys directly, but how do you make sure that your time is not sucked too much into the day-to-day? Depending on where you are in the business. If you're a frontline shift manager, then probably 90% of what you do is going to be around day-to-day, week-to-week. There's going to be a lot less looking further. If you're in a higher general manager's position, then you're going to be probably thinking, 70, maybe more, is going to be looking in the future. And maybe 20 is going to be around the middle and the short term, so maybe the months, and maybe the day-to-day is only 10% because you've got people who are doing the day-to-day. And that obviously brings around the idea of accountability. Let people know the whys they are there for, but make them know that they are there to deliver. So are they aware of what they are meant to deliver? Have you looked at the idea of the RACI model, the accountability, responsibility, communication, inform? That model works because some people don't know. They're so much in the weeds, they don't realise that they're supposed to be looking higher up. And you've got to get people to challenge themselves to, delegate, which is one of the big things that we do in the big five, to delegate themselves out of the weeds. And that's making sure that their directs, their -1s and -2s, are doing their job right. Because if they're always doing everything, and we've said this before, why do I need the others? If person X is doing the job of Y and Z, then why have I got Y and Z? If I can just keep X, probably save you some money. But it's not the right way to do it. You've got to get people being accountable, looking at the right areas, making sure their tools that they've got are good to push them forward. And that leads into making sure that your team have developed. And so have you made sure that you've got a trusted team? If there's some dysfunction, are you, I want to say brave, it's not brave, but are you confident enough to challenge and make sure people understand why it's been dysfunction? Do you have a high-performing team? If so, what works well for them and what could work well in other areas? Do they communicate and hold each other accountable? So is it just you as a leader giving it to everybody else and they just follow? And that leads into management styles. There is different styles. There's controlling, there's very laissez-faire, there's all different styles of management. But realistically, when you look at it, are you giving enough power away? Or are your directs giving enough power away? Because you can have some great guys working for you and girls. But if they take too much on and try to do everything, you're in that position of, well, are they just papering over the cracks of a dysfunctioning, poorly motivated, trustless team? You've got to think of it that way around, because if they're doing so much, they may think they're doing the right thing by doing so much and protecting, in their eyes, their team. But realistically, they're not doing themselves or the business the favour, because if you're pushing people that usually are higher paid into those roles, then they're not got the freedom to develop. They've not got the freedom to move to, as I say, a 70% looking forward, or even 80% looking forward, because there's so much in that day-to-day, hour-to-hour even. Not saying that you don't have to jump into a crisis management situation. There is going to be times, and that's another thing of the concept of leadership and management, is you're going to have to be able to crisis management. You're going to have a procedure. You're going to need to make sure your people are trained, because you're not going to be there all the time. If it's the middle of the night, you don't expect your senior team to be on site. So they're going to have to make sure that not just them, but their directs understand their part to play when things go wrong, when to escalate, what to do in the short term to make sure it isn't any worse. Control they can control, so control the controllables, but then have a process to follow to make sure that they've identified the issue. And that's all around crisis management and making sure you've got a crisis management team in there. And the last part of this, and it's always going to be the last part because it's part of what you should do, is continually improve. Because what's good today might not be good for tomorrow. So how do we look at standardising the ways you're working, using CI or continuous improvement tools or business improvement tools or lean tools or Six Sigma tools or whatever you want to call them? They're all there to get a standard way of working, to remove variation, to solve problems, to fix issues, not just for short term, long term, fix forever. You'll hear the 100-year fix used a lot. How do you get the controls to say that when you're going to make X amount, then you make X amount, because that obviously helps you make sure you're hitting your service, make sure your costs are right. Do you have your right meetings? Are meetings productive? Number of people go in meetings thinking that a meeting is the production part of it. It's not. The meeting is the bit that you get information. The productivity part is outside the meeting. But have you got the right meeting governance? Do we escalate the right problems so that it's not always passing the monkeys on? But do they have an avenue, a conduit to escalate when there's a problem? And can we design in from the start the idea of the end-to-end? So you're designing in quality from a start to the finish. And that's a really good tool to start with, is the number of times you have to re-engineer something because it's not right, instead of engineering it in the right place. And obviously, when you look at lean, and there's a number of different ways of doing lean. I've said you've got lean and Six Sigma, but it's around solving problems, removing waste, validating and making sure that you're reducing the variations. Use data to drive these things. But at the end of it, it's trying to create a product that someone wants and get paid and deliver it as quick as you can with the minimum amount of waste. And that's one of the big concepts of leadership, is around continually improving it. And all the areas I spoke around today and in the other two will all need an element of improvement, a cycle that says we've planned, we've done, we've checked, and we've acted. So that is part 3. So touched on a lot of in quite a short space of time. We've talked around the concept of delivering results. We've talked around career development, change concepts, recruiting, having the right strategy, future-proofing. Then you're looking at idea of accountability, day in the life of a manager, getting some team development in there, managing your crisis, and obviously, at the end, continually improving and making sure you're better. And on that note, I would love you to help me continually improve my show. So, as ever, I'd love to hear your feedback. You can email to managermattpodcasts@gmail.com. Love to engage on topics old and new. And as I read all the emails myself, and I will promise to answer you, then, please do that. And if there's any questions you want to ask, or if there's any help you want, this is a completely free service. Please reach out. It'd be lovely to engage if I could speak, but it'd be lovely to engage on all the topics you want me to engage. But we've done 20 minutes, so that's it for Manager Matt this week. Thanks for listening as ever, and goodbye.
Thank you so much for listening to this Manager Matt podcast. We hope you found it interesting, helpful and actionable. One last thing, please leave a quick review on iTunes or with your podcast provider, as it helps to spread the word of Manager Matt. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the podcast, and if you did like anything in particular, send an email to managermattpodcast@gmail.com or visit managermatt.co.uk for more content. Feedback is a gift, so let's keep giving. See you next week.